Good morning. The you you folks are at the subcommittee hearing for HB 232, which is um, addressing private sector OSHA standards. And at this point, what we are looking to do is adopt the OSHA standards without necessarily going full out for a state plan. And we had a study committee a year ago, and that study committee got shortened up substantially more than we would have liked, and so the committee chose to retain the bill so that we could get more input from the stakeholders. So that's why we are here, and I'm looking out. And I'm seeing stakeholders, so that's a good thing. And essentially, what by adopting the OSHA standards, what we're suggesting we want to do is to adopt the 1910 standards, and those are the general standards. There's two other categories, but we felt this was the most appropriate one. It is a substantial list of standards. We've got Wes from the department here, and we've got him to thank for doing a side-by-side comparison of the OSHA standards and the Department of Labor standards. And what that is available to folks. The comparison, it is a fairly large file. It's not something you're going to want to print out unless you got a lot of paper. But essentially, I've forwarded it to Kristen, and who is the committee assistant, and she would be happy to send it out to anybody who would like to have a copy of it. I also have it, so if you want to contact me, Brian Sullivan, Representative Brian Sullivan, I'd be happy to send it out as well. But there are, I think you will find that there are a lot of standards that don't apply to the various employers. So you can find the standards that are most applicable to whatever type of employment you're involved with. So with that, I would be happy to open it up to folks who would like to weigh in on if you've got questions, if you've got concerns, if you've got suggestions. We're here to listen. So anybody out there want to talk to the committee? If you could introduce yourself as you come up, please.
Hi, my name is Susie Nord, and I work for the National Council for Occupational Safety and Health. And I was going to wait for other people because I feel like I have had the opportunity to address the committee about why National COSH supports House Bill 232 and has in fact been working towards helping the state of New Hampshire adopt a public sector OSHA plan. And I feel like this is a good next step in that. But where nobody else decided to come up, I thought I would just tell you I've been doing a little research, which I said that I would do at the last time I was in a hearing to address some of the questions I'd heard. And I wanted to let you know what had come of that. So, one of the things that people were most concerned about was how OSHA standards, which are mostly for private sector, interact with public services such as police and fire, which don't necessarily seem like they're a good fit. And I found a number of things. First of all, I should back up a little bit. My organization has a list serve for health and safety professionals of about 2,000 people across the country who work in health and safety, occupational health professionals such as doctors, lawyers, industrial hygienists, people who are on health and safety committees in workplaces, and also many workers as well who are involved in health and safety in their own organizations. So I put the question out, how does a public sector OSHA plan interact specifically with fire safety or police? And I heard from a number of people, including one person who is actually recently retired from the Washington State OSHA plan. So this is a person who has, so in the state of Washington, they have a public sector OSHA plan, and she was one of the people who administered it. And she basically said that they never had any problems with dealing with fire and police specifically because they worked very closely with the fire and police departments to adopt sort of the national standards. And there's acronyms that I won't bore you with, mostly because I can't remember them, that are actually more protective than what is in the 1910 standards. And so I don't think that any of that, as long as we're following national standards for protecting our fire and police officers, should be a problem because they're probably already doing more than these would require anyway. Um, she did give me a couple of interesting examples. I'll tell you about one of them that they worked with their state police about lead at the firing range because apparently there was concerns about the amount of lead from when they fire the bullets. Apparently, bullets have lead. I'm not a gun person, so I don't know. But so that was something that having the they call it DOSH there. It's the Department of Occupational Health and Washington DOSH or WADOSH, and that was something that they worked on that wasn't covered by existing police standards, but that that it was a benefit that having the public sector OSHA added for their state police. I guess the other thing that I really want to highlight is that I've spoken to people who work with some of the public sector employers since the original hearings on this bill. And I think there's a mischaracterization that this is creating new things for public sector employers to actually have to comply with because my reading and understanding is that the Department of Labor, the New Hampshire Department of Labor, has an understanding that public sector employers will keep their workers safe and that they are charged with ensuring that this happens. And so they do inspections and go out. And this is nothing new. The only thing new is that a few years ago, it was put into statute instead of just being in rules. And there's a number for the rules, and I don't know that either. And that my understanding from the former Deputy Commissioner Rudy Ogden was that the OSHA standards that we're looking to incorporate into House Bill 232 are one of the places that they look when the New Hampshire standards are silent, because it gives them sort of a meaningful guideline or guidance for the employers. And so the idea, my understanding from the study committee last year, and the reason that the study committee unanimously supported the concept of what House Bill 232 does, is that most public sector employers didn't necessarily know that this was one of the places that the Department of Labor inspectors were going for guidance when doing their inspections. And so the committee or the study committee last year believed that this bill was basically not requiring anything specifically new. It was saying, let's make public the standards that people are being held to currently. So without, and I'll take any questions, but those are the 2 points that I really have sort of been thinking about this summer and really feel like in my discussions with people, those are 2 points of clarity I felt needed to be made.
Any questions from the committee? Thank you. Um, Perhaps if the department is willing to um, enlighten us further on the general duties clause and how that interacts with the Department of Labor standards and any other standards, including the OSHA standards.
Yes, of course. Wesley Gardner, attorney for the New Hampshire Department of Labor. So, as was just testified to, we do have the general duties clause that kind of fills in the gaps where we don't have specific safety standards. And again, to clarify, our safety inspectors do look to OSHA 1910, 1926, and 1928 where applicable. And again, it is for guidance, though. I think the key point of distinction here is if the committee and the legislature were to adopt this, it does become law and it's no longer simply guidance. But yes, I can clarify and confirm that what our safety inspectors do when they see a gap in our specific safety standards, they will look to the OSHA standards as well as other national standards just to see what might be appropriate in certain specific situations.
Can you clarify when the DOL standards have last been updated and modified?
One second here. So, of course, it depends on each specific statute. From what I can tell, the last update was 2019 for any of the RSA 277 standards. But again, some of them have not been updated since, the 1980s or the 1990s.
I seem to recall that Deputy Commissioner Ogden had indicated that they, for the most part, hadn't really been updated since he's been with the department, which was, I think, 10 years or more.
Yes, that is correct. And I do remember Deputy Commissioner Ogden testifying to that. Again, there's been a handful of the RSA 277 provisions that have been updated, but by and large, many of the provisions have not been updated in some time.
And would you agree that one of the advantages might be that OSHA standards are continuously being updated and would, if we adopt the 1910 standards, they would be updated regularly and automatically adopted?
Yes, as I understand it, it's an annual thing that the OSHA standards are updated. They're constantly being updated. I can tell you that the department, myself and Deputy Commissioner Ogden met with Joe LaRose, who's the field supervisor for OSHA at the federal level, and he did state that they are constantly being updated on an annual basis. So that is something that the department, as well as all the stakeholders, would have to be mindful of. That this is a constant rolling update in the standards that are being implemented.
Is the department able to assist employers, public sector employers, in keeping track of those updates?
I would say the department is able to, however, the caveat being that at current state, we have 2 safety inspectors with a third position open. Obviously, the 3 safety inspector positions were intended to implement Chapter 277 as currently written and as our safety standards are currently written. So it's inevitable that there will probably be a lot more interest from stakeholders in trying to comply with the new standards. So we do have minimal capacity as it relates to implementation of these laws, in the sense that we would expect that a lot of stakeholders will have a lot of questions. They want consultancies to determine if they are in compliance. So to your specific question, yes, I do believe that the department can assist employers. However, again, the capacity at current state is rather minimal, again, given that our 3 safety inspector positions were intended to support Chapter 277 as it's currently written.
I seem to recall that Deputy Commissioner Ogden had indicated that along with the adoption of 232, the department would likely hire additional personnel. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, I am familiar with that, and if I recall correctly from the committee last year, Deputy Commissioner Ogden testified he believed that we would need approximately 6 new positions. I believe there would be 1 safety manager position, 3 inspector positions, 1 clerical position, and 2 consultant positions, if I remember correctly.
Can you indicate how that would impact the general fund?
So I don't think it would impact the general fund in the sense that the Department of Labor historically does not take from the general fund. Rather, over the last few years, we've given to the general fund. However, of course, any new positions would, cost more money at the end of the day, but it should not have any impact on the general fund specifically, to my knowledge.
Yeah, I was surprised to learn.
Sorry, absent the give back that the department does would inevitably be lower, of course.
Right. But I was surprised to learn that the department doesn't use general funds. And also, I think Deputy Commissioner Ogden indicated that due to a more a bigger effort on part of the department of collecting, I think, fees and such. They had gone from having $1 million that they sent back to more like 2 or 3.
I believe the number this year was closer to 3 million. Yes.
Yeah. So I think you could probably squeeze a few additional employees out of $3 million.
Potentially, again, caveat just being that that's less that goes to the general fund from the department.
Right. Questions from the committee? All set. Okay.
Right, thank you,
Thank you,
Representative.
Mr. Gardner. The floor is open to other folks to speak their mind. Ms. Horgan, anything on behalf of the committees or the counties?
Thank you, Representative Sullivan. Kate Horgan from the New Hampshire Association of Counties. I will actually have 5 people here next week to address the committee. Several HR managers, one of the corrections superintendents, and one of our nursing home administrators who can more accurately address any questions you guys all have. So I would defer, if you are willing to let me to defer until next week when I have my subject matter experts here, that would be great.
I think you should do it all right now. Okay, thank you. That's good to know.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Anything from the Department of Administrative Services? We're good. Okay. It's starting to feel like a short day. Yep, please.
It's a little bit embarrassing for me to ask, but can you please refresh my memory of why we're going the route of going the OSHA 1910 standards rather than looking at updating our current safety standards that we have under Chapter 277?
I think, well, the initial effort was to create a state plan, which would have basically brought the public sector employees under OSHA. It was a fairly involved process. The subcommittee or the study committee chose to adopt just the OSHA standards rather than going for the state plan because it's a more streamlined process. And frankly, by adopting the OSHA standards, we save a lot of time and effort on the part of the department. And obviously, the department hasn't been updating its standards, and this would be a sweeping update. Basically, I think the study committee felt that a change was in order the failure to update over the last many years is something that needed to be addressed, and we felt the best way to address it was to simply adopt the standards from OSHA. And I think the other piece of it has already been stated, but I think it's worth restating. The department uses a general duties clause pretty regularly in addressing safety issues, and and there are lots of gaps. I mean, if one were to review the side-by-side comparison, it does identify a lot of things that OSHA covers that the Department of Labor Standards does not. But when an unsafe situation is identified where there's a gap in the Department of Labor Standards, they turn to OSHA. The problem is that if an employer or employee group is reviewing the Department of Labor Standards, they wouldn't know that the General Duties Clause is going to cause the department to look to the OSHA standards. So if they're already using OSHA standards in various circumstances, it's worthwhile for people to know that if you want to really see the standards, look to the 1910 standards, and that will provide the guidance needed.
If I may.
You may.
On that topic, I think it's important that the work of this committee characterize that. We heard some general discussion before, and you kind of reiterated that some of the anticipated cost isn't really cost, because today we expect all the employers to have a safe environment for their workers, and that's not going to change. But as this advances to the larger bodies and goes across the wall, I think it's you and I and many of us here have been working on this for years and years, and we understand that all that background. But I think it's going to be important to characterize that in a way that everyone can evaluate that, and when a town or a county says, whoa, this is downshifting costs from the state to us and our tax base, that we know how to explain that in terms of hard facts. And I hope, I appreciate that you'll want to have experts come and help explain that to us rather than summarize to it. So I hope that in the next meeting that we'll be able to come to some kind of understanding that then this committee can use to explain to the legislature at large why we think this is the right idea.
Thank you.
If I may, can we go back to Mr. Garner, if I have your name correctly, and just get a little bit more information? I'm a little curious about the labor statistics with what we currently have. We have 2 inspectors with 1 empty position to be filled. But if we adopt OSHA 1910 standards, then we need to fill 6 positions. Why would there be a disparity between what we're doing today in our safety program versus what this OSHA 1910 is going to bring?
Yes, thank you. So one of the big my apologies. Thank you for the question, Representative. So one of the key distinctions there is one is the consultancy program. OSHA does require a consultancy program that the state of New Hampshire doesn't currently have. So again, we would need a couple of consultants that they basically go out to the employers and they kind of review what they have for safety standards, their safety plans, and they go over them and tell them how they might come into compliance. Again, it's wide sweeping regulations, so this assistance is necessary. The other piece of it as well, too, is given the wide sweeping nature of it, We would just simply need more inspectors. As the committee is probably aware and has been testified to, the 277 standards are relatively minimal in comparison to the OSHA standards, and there also needs to be more subject matter expertise, I would say, as well too. So that's why we would need more. And again, another point of clarification as well is when Deputy Commissioner Ogden testified to that last year, that was very specific to the state plan implementation, which is not merely just the 1910s. So I would say we don't need all 6 positions were we to adopt the 1910s, but in going towards the state plan, that was the intention for what Deputy Commissioner Ogden had stated as the expansion.
To be clear, this bill does not create a state plan.
Correct.
This bill just adopts the standards. If we were to adopt this or create a state plan, that would be something down the road. It would require additional legislation, and but at this point, the study committee was comfortable with, and frankly, the states of Maine and Massachusetts have both just adopted state plans. But prior to adopting the state plans, they adopted the OSHA safety standards. So it seems like it worked effectively for them. We would not ever necessarily have to adopt a state plan. I can see legislatures in the future wanting to consider that because federal money comes along with the state plan. But for now, it, as has been said, this is a good next step, getting the standards in, and then down the road, if we so choose, we could adopt or create a state plan. But this doesn't do that.
That's correct.
And so possibly all 6 of those positions would not be needed at this time?
That's correct. Again, the point of clarity is that when Deputy Commissioner Ogden testified to the guess of 6 additional employees for the department, that was based on the state plan. But again, the department is able to implement this, but we will be stretched thin with the 2 current safety inspectors. And again, the big piece of it is the consultancy program that we do not currently have. The safety inspectors do go, they help evaluate employers' plans, their safety rules, and get them into compliance, but it's not a full consultancy program by any means.
But the HB 232 does, to my knowledge, does not create a consultancy program.
That is correct. However, we anticipate that many of these stakeholders will reach out to the department, in essence, looking for a consultancy to ensure that they're in compliance before they get the department gets a complaint and an inspector has to go out there and cite them for violations.
That makes sense.
We expect them to be proactive.
Great. Yep.
And I believe you mentioned an admin position as well. What would the need for the additional administrative position be that you don't have today?
So I'm assuming you're speaking of like the safety manager position that Deputy Commissioner Ogden identified, is that, or a clerical position? Yeah, it's just the fact of having several more inspectors, the consultancy program, and just having an admin position to support that. That's all it is.
And the consultancy program, if I'm understanding correctly, doesn't sound like it's going to be a permanent long-term position. It sounds more like it would be a short-term.
So the consultancy program is a piece of the OSHA state plan, as I understand it, that is required to have and maintain a state plan and receive federal funding. So if the intent were to eventually go to a state plan, of course, that would have to be in place. More than likely, it's hard to say, though, overall, of what the volume of stakeholder reach out would be and whether it would be just an initial 1 to 2 year thing where this new legislation is in place. So it is hard to say, but I do know, at least, again, for the OSHA state plan and OSHA regulations in general, the consultancy program is a very key piece of that because a lot of employers, again, are proactive in reaching out to determine if they are in compliance before, God forbid, an accident happens or a complaint comes in and the inspector has to go out there.
Another? Yeah. Can I have a little bit of information about what the federal funding looks like? What is it that we're looking for this federal funding?
So as I understand it, the federal funding, what happens is when a state implements a state OSHA plan, they've been working usually for years with federal OSHA. if federal OSHA approves the state plan and finds that the standards are either the same or at least as effective, then the state can apply to the federal government. And as I understand it, it does have to be an application, it's not automatic. The state can apply to the federal government for up to 50% of federal funding. And as I understand it, it's at the discretion of the federal government of how much funding it is. Again, it goes up to 50%. It can be anything lower than 50%, though. And there's no guarantee for federal funds. And in light of that as well, too, the state does have to keep a rolling update to make sure that they're in compliance with federal OSHA standards and that the standards are at least as effective to maintain getting receipt of that federal funding.
And what are some of the things that we would be using this federal funding for? Is it for buying equipment or is it for staffing your
It
department?
would be for
or-
staffing and supporting the positions by and large, yes. As I understand it, the department wouldn't need any more equipment, I don't believe. Maybe state cars is the only thing I can really think of generally. But there's no other equipment that I can think of off the top of my head that we would need. So the funding would be for state positions and just implementing the plan in general.
And as I understand it, when you say 50%, it's 50% of the entire public sector safety program.
That is how I understand it as well, yes.
Are we receiving any federal funds now?
We are
With
receiving no
programs we-
federal funds, no.
federal funding.
If I could, I just want to make it clear that the proposal on the table in front of us comes with no federal funding. We would not be eligible for that. There's nothing in here that says we would work towards that eligibility or submit that application. We did in the first version of this bill, if you will, to come through the legislature, that was the proposal. And that's why many of us are at least passingly familiar with what the requirements are. But over the years, this committee has decided not to go that route, and we could get into the details. Let's just, not to be controversial, say there were questions whether that would be a net gain or a net cost, because that funding also comes with requirements. Would it pay for the requirements and then some? Would it pay for almost all the requirements? We hadn't clarified that number. And this committee decided to go a different route, which was to implement it all within state law, which then makes us ineligible, at least at this time, to work through that federal program. So discussions about what federal money is available and what it would pay for are for something very different than what we're considering.
And I think some of the other attraction was to, frankly, not necessarily involve OSHA in New Hampshire safety programs. This would be the Department of Labor implementing the OSHA standards without the help or interference of federal OSHA. So it gets us enhanced standards without having to jump through all the various hoops that OSHA require with the state plan. I think that's why the study committee was comfortable going this route rather than the state plan. Let's do it ourselves. Let's adopt the standards and stick with our Department of Labor and their method of doing things, because I think one of the nice parts about our Department of Labor is that it is not overly punitive. When it finds issues with safety, their objective is to get it fixed, not to punish. I think that's something that we want to make sure we maintain. And it'll be more of a education process than a whack you over the head process. So I think that was the attraction to doing it in the manner that we are.
Yep. Thank you.
Anything further? We're all ears here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize, I was late coming in. If you're just taking open.
Yep.
Okay. For the record, Brian Hawkins, representing NEA New Hampshire. We represent K-12 employees in most school districts in the state. And so obviously, safety standards would have an important impact for our members. Schools are first and foremost places for students, but they're also places of employment. And so we would very much like to work with the committee, help the committee to the extent they need information. One of the benefits of being part of an affiliate of a national organization is that we also have the benefit of, knowing what the experience is like in other states for employees in schools that either are an OSHA state or, have safety standards that are comparable to OSHA. And so I mainly want to say we're eager to work with the committee and hope to attend all your sessions. And please let us know what information we can help provide.
Great. And I would also suggest that if you enhance safety standards for the teachers, you inevitably enhance safety standards for the students as well. So they're all in the same boat. So I think enhanced safety is good for schools.
Indeed.
Any questions from the committee? Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
If there are no other folks who want to weigh in on this, I guess we will adjourn for today and come back next week and look forward to hearing from any employers or employee groups that want to weigh in. We just want to, what we heard at the end of the study committee, or well, basically when we were dealing with this bill, was that people wanted an opportunity to do this, so that we are providing that opportunity and looking forward to hearing from folks. We are adjourned. Thank you.